proceeded. Well, we will proceed as planned. So, no, speak to your phone. The mic's on, but you're not speaking.
This I'm sure you can hear. I think there might be a problem with this mic. Okay, all right. So hi everyone, and welcome to this nice book discussion that we have for you this afternoon. My name is Bhagya. I should introduce myself briefly. I am the Straits Times foreign editor, and I've been with Straits Times now for about 20 years. A part of that, yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you, thank you. But yes, 20 years, and a part of that was, as the Straits Times US correspondent in Washington, D.C. So that was great. This was towards the end of the George W. Bush administration, and it was the start of Obama, and that was a very different America. And that I continue to be obviously fascinated by the country. And so when I was asked to moderate this discussion, I really didn't have to think twice. And we are very fortunate to have the writers of this very interesting book, America, A Singapore Perspective. And Professor Tommy Koh, I really don't need to introduce him. He is such a familiar and respected face for us all. And you probably follow his writings keenly, whether in Straits Times or through books. This is not the only one. He's got so many. And of course, he wears many hats. He's a professor at the NUS, National University of Singapore. He also is associated with the Institute of Policy Studies. He is the ambassador at large at Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So many hats. And in between that, he still manages to find time for books, writing, editing. And then he's also very active on the social media. So I follow him on Facebook. And a very active grandfather. Let that be on the record, yes. So yeah, I love watching, the photographs you post of your grandkids. And pertinent to this discussion, I should mention that he was also the Singapore's ambassador to the US, 1984, right? 1984 to 1990. No? To Washington. 84 to 90, yes, 84 to 90. And of course, he was also the chief negotiator when US and Singapore did their free trade pact. So, he's got very, very deep insights and long observation of America. So therefore, very good to have him on this book. And then we have Mr. Daljit Singh. He's been kind enough to join us. He has had a very long association with the Institute of Southeast Asia Studies, the Yusof Ishak Institute, where he was senior fellow and senior visiting fellow. And he is also a long-time editor of the annual publication on Southeast Asia that ISEAS brings out, right? So a long-time observer as well of Southeast Asia as well as the US. Now, is it okay, Professor Koh, if I just very briefly talk about the book, my observations about the book? Okay. So I just have a couple of things to say about this book, which I think is fantastic. First, of course, I think the timing was very good. It came out late last year, and we have seen so many different faces of America the last few years. So I think it was very helpful to have reflections on, on various things and how they are changing. I mean, of course, it's not just the US, the rest of the world is changing too, as we are, as the world is changing. But I thought the timing was really indeed very much, on the spot. And then the other thing is I've also liked the very wide range of topics that, this book has brought. So it's everything from the very basics, about the country, how it got started, and to things like its values, ideals, the pop culture, of course, history, econs, geopolitics, everything. And, it's a good window into what is America. And the good thing is that, there's so many books on America, obviously. I mean, we're in the library and there are hundreds and hundreds. The good thing here, and this is what I like about it also, is that it gives you, it's a gaze of someone in Singapore and Southeast Asia, in Asia, looking at America. So we are outsiders looking in, and we are friendly and sympathetic observers. So we are poking at loving critic, as Professor Koh says. So we are looking in with appreciation and with a view to understanding, because America impacts our lives in so many different ways. So it's, and even where it's critical, it is meant, it comes from that place, a loving critic, as Professor Koh says. The other thing is, of course, you need a book like this, I feel, because right now we are living in a very polarized world. And, there are high stakes, disinformation campaigns too that go on. There is lot of public diplomacy that goes on. So it's useful to have something to sort of read and be able to then make up your mind to have a resource like this. So, those are my observations. And I thought we could start, Professor Koh, with you telling us what actually got you started, what motivated you to write this book.
I think it's better for me to stand up so that people in the back can see us. The chairs are very low. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon, and I look forward to a very good discussion about America. I want to begin by introducing my co-editor. Daljit Singh and I have known each other since 1952. Yeah, we belong to the dinosaur. Yeah, in 1952, both of us joined a high school in Singapore called Raffles. And then we both went to study at the same university. He was in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. I was in the Faculty of Law. He had a very distinguished career in the civil service. And then he's been with one of our leading research institution, the Institute of Southeast Asian Study. So this book began at a lunch that the two of us had. And I told Daljit that I had already produced 23 books and that he had not done any book. And I said, why don't the two of us do a book together? And he said, okay, what shall we do? I said, let's edit a good book on America as told by Singaporeans. Now, why did I suggest this book? First, at a personal level, I had spent over 20 years of my life in America. I was a student in America. I spent 13 years in New York at the UN, and then 6 years in Washington, D.C. I have taught at various universities in different parts of America. So it's a country that I've come to love, and a country that I know not very well, but fairly well. So I feel that I should try to explain America to Singaporeans. America is a very complicated country. And it is also a very changeable country. Can you imagine America having a president like Barack Obama to be succeeded by somebody like Donald Trump, So the pendulum in America swings from one end to the other. And America can one day be very liberal, outward-looking, champion of free trade, and another moment it becomes inward-looking, protectionist. as was the case with Donald Trump. So it's changeable. And I felt that Daljit and I, with our knowledge of America, could pull together Singaporeans to help us explain America to the Singapore reader. Our objective is not to defend America, but to explain America. Yeah. There's another point that unites both of us. There are many Singaporeans who believe that China is a rising power and America is in terminal decline. Yeah. Daljit and I don't believe that. We believe, of course, that China is a rising power, but we believe that America is not in terminal decline, and that people who hold this view underestimate American resilience, resolve, and great strength. So those are the objectives that led us to do this book. Daljit contributed one essay to the book on America's forward defense policy. So if any question on defense, please address them to him. I contributed 3 essays to the book, and I'm happy to take questions on the 3 essays. The first essay is on American values and ideals. My basic point is that what unites America is not race. It is not religion. It is a set of values and ideals. So that's my first essay. My second essay is to explain the African Americans. Why the African American? I went to America as a student in 1963 when America still practiced segregation. Yeah, I mean, coming from Singapore, this was a shock to me to find that there were black students at my class who couldn't eat at some places I could eat at, couldn't stay in some hotels I could stay at, and it really moved me, So I was determined to support the American Civil Rights Movement. And I actually spent part of the summer of 1964 staying in a black ghetto in Boston called Roxbury. So I want to explain the history of the African American, the position they have in America today, what are the challenges facing them, and why are so many African Americans being killed by the police in America. So that's my second essay. My third essay is an essay to explain the 2020 presidential election. So if you have questions on that, please ask me. Yeah. But I'm happy, of course, to answer other questions on other essays in the book. There are 29 essays, I think, and very good essays. So thank you.
Right. Okay, so we will, of course, take questions from the audience, but maybe I could begin with one for you, Professor Koh. So, there are so many things I want to ask you, but let me begin with the headlines today, right? So if you, not in SD, but in the American papers, the headlines are all about the US Capitol Hill riot. Yeah. So the incidents which took place after exactly January 6, 2021. So this was after President Donald Trump lost election and alleged that it was stolen from him without providing any proof, but made remarks which the allegation is incited his supporters to riot. And so those are the headlines today. My question to you is, this is the face of America we are seeing today. Can you explain what this is and whether this is a threat to the American political system?
Okay. A very good question. So let me answer that by saying that in my view, American democracy is in very big trouble. Let me explain why. Huh? I live in Washington during what I would call a golden period. In that golden period, the two main parties, the Democratic Party, Republican Party, took turns to govern the country. And there was a relationship of civility and cooperation between them, Leaders of the two parties would often get together, put aside their differences and forge policies which are bipartisan, but which are inspired by American national interest. At a personal level, whenever my wife entertained at home, we would invite equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. And they're happy to come because they are friends, you know. They may fight each other during the day, but when the job is done, they are friends. They're happy to drink together, have dinner together. Their wives are friends. Unfortunately, that era is gone. Yeah? That era is gone. They not only see each other as friends, colleagues, but they now see each other as enemies. Yeah. And I was very shocked when President Obama was elected and the Senate Majority Leader, Republican, Mitch McConnell, said publicly that his objective is to prevent Obama from having a second term. You know, that kind of statement could not have been made in the time I was in America. You know, it shows you a very new relationship in the two parties, which is toxic, see each other as enemy. They don't socialize. They don't look for common ground. Their objective is to bring the other party down. Yeah. And President Donald Trump is truly a maverick, but not in a good sense, huh? Like not like Top Gun, no? But in a bad sense. This is maybe the first American leader who was not gracious when defeated. You know, something I used to admire America is that after an election, the person that loses the election would be extremely gracious and phone the victorious candidate to congratulate you. Even though your heart may be crying, but it was obligatory that you phone the victor, congratulate him. And the victor would be equally gracious in thanking you and ask for your support. This was the American way, you know. Donald Trump is the first candidate for the presidential election who lost the election, refused to admit that he lost, and worse than that, has convinced 70 to 80% of the members of the Republican Party to believe in his big lie. And the reason why Biden has such low popularity rating in America is that half the people in America don't see him as a legitimate president. They said that they believe in Donald Trump's big lie that he had stolen the election. The truth is, of course, Donald Trump lost the election. And in January last year, he instigated a mob to invade the House of the US Congress to prevent the Congress from certifying the result of the election. And on this occasion, in this crisis, I'm very proud of the Vice President Mike Pence, who refused to do what Donald Trump asked him to do. I'm also proud of the same person I mentioned earlier, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the Senate, who also refused to give in to Donald Trump's threat. And these men, Mitch McConnell, Mike Pence, they did the right thing for the country. But to conclude, I feel very sad for America today when I look at the state of American democracy. You know, the country is polarized. The two parties see each other as enemies. They don't cooperate with each other. And I always say to Americans that American is strong abroad when you are united at home. But you have today not a United States of America, but a disunited States of America.
Yes. So, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll sit. I mean, the hearings in the House of Representatives, which are being made public from today, how much effect they will have in reducing the political polarization in the United States, I think is very uncertain, maybe to a small extent, because you know, CNN will broadcast it, but Fox News is not broadcasting it. And America, instead of broadcasting these days, broadcasting reaches broadly everyone, you have narrowcasting. Yeah. In other words, some people in America just watch Fox News. Yeah. Fox News is not going to carry it. CNN will carry it. So it may, I think it's a good thing they are bringing all these things out into the public. It may have some good effect, but I'm not very optimistic.
Right. If you permit me one quick follow-up. So you've described the problem very well, right? The state of play in the civic society between the two political parties, very bitterly opposed. That is the political part of things. But why is it so? I mean, why is it so? What is the reason that there is such bitterness? You said when you saw America, when you were posted there, you saw a different and a sweeter side of America. So why has it turned bitter? What might be your thoughts on that?
I think in addition to the political warfare, you also have a cultural war in America. Yeah. I hope it never comes here. Huh? I mean, no country is immune from the possibility that people will be divided, not just on political lines, but also divided on cultural lines. What do I mean by cultural war? In America, certain moral issues are very polarizing. Half the Americans believe that a woman has a right to abortion. The other half of the Americans disagree with that and feel very strongly that from the moment of conception, the fetus has a right to live. So we expect in the coming days that the US Supreme Court will overturn the historic judgment in Roe versus Wade. And this will accentuate this cultural divide in America. But there are other issues that also divide America. Gay rights is an example. I think half the American people believe that the LGBT community have every right to the same status, privileges as American as others. There are others who feel very strongly that the LGBT community is a community of perverts, and they shouldn't be allowed to be part of the mainstream. Gay marriages is also a polarizing issue. Yeah. Again, they divide the country into roughly two equal halves. Many Americans believe that gays have the same right to marry as straight people. And there are others who feel very strongly that that is wrong, yeah, that a marriage should be between a man and a woman. There are the right to own guns is another polarizing issue. It's in a book, why this fascination with gun. Abortion is in my book, in our book, I mean. Gun rights in our book. So you have all these issues that, which I call a cultural war, that divide the Americans. So America is polarized, not just politically, but also culturally,
Well, while we're on the topic, if you could tell us, projecting from here, given how bitter they are, is this a bad thing? Are you still optimistic about how things will be in short order?
I'm a born optimist.
Right.
So as a born optimist, I have to believe that the future will be better than today. I can't predict when. I hope America will change again and will change for the better than for the worse. This is not evidence-based statement, but simply based on my optimistic nature. Maybe Daljit will be more pessimistic. Daljit, what's your prediction of America's future?
I believe that America will remain the preeminent power, not China, but with one small reservation, and that is the domestic politics. I think what will bring America down is domestic politics. In other words, if you have leaders like Trump coming back, because the country is so polarized, who follow erratic foreign policies or may resort to isolationism or reckless wars, they could destroy or seriously damage America's position in the world. So I think that's my only concern. Otherwise, I'm quite optimistic about America's future.
Does anyone in the audience have a question on this topic?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm just very curious. America is divided in many ways, abortion, guns, and all that. Why are they united on China? Is it cultural? Because America's never had problems with human rights. It has allies. It ignores Saudi Arabia, ignores Israeli Palestinian issues, etc. So is this cultural, or is this about hegemony, maintenance of hegemony at all costs?
It's a very good question. We don't have an essay on China in the book, huh? So let me maybe in the next edition. So let me give you my take. Huh? Historically, the Chinese people and the American people have always liked each other. And historically, the Americans have tried not to join the European colonial and imperial power in exploiting China. So there's a well of goodwill on both sides for each other. But of course, after the Second World War, when the Chinese Communist Party defeated the Kuomintang, the US government decided to recognize the KMT, recognize the Republic of China. And for a long period, until 1972, the United States and China were enemies. They had no diplomatic relations. They saw each other as opposed to their national interests. And then in 1972, President Nixon shocked the world by going to China to see Chairman Mao. Why did he do that? Especially for someone who, in his own congressional career, was very anti-communist, you know. See, Nixon was a strategic thinker. So his opposition to communism in America was irrelevant. What he was looking for was to forge an alliance with China against Soviet Union. See, they had a common enemy. You know, in international relations, very often alliances are forged on the basis that we have a common enemy. Yeah? So during World War II, you remember that United Kingdom, United States, and the Soviet Union forged an alliance against Hitler. You know? So from 1972 until the end of the Cold War, there was this US-Chinese alliance. This alliance lost its logic when the Cold War ended in 1989 and the Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991. So this relationship was bound to change, you see. For the longest time, Americans believed in a policy of engagement and cooperation with China. The objective was to bring China out of isolation, socialize China, bring China into the world, you know. And China and America helped China to gain accession to WTO, which was a big thing for China, you know. What began to change is that China transformed from a poor country to become a prosperous country. And China transformed from being a weak country to a powerful country. And for the first time since the end of the Cold War, America faced a challenger that's not quite peer, but near peer challenger. Americans see in China a country that has the potential and the will to challenge American leadership in the world. I wouldn't use the word hegemony, it's a bad word, you know, leadership in the world. So that partly explained why the Americans have turned from being positive about China to become very negative about it. But there were other things at work here, no? The human rights lobby in America is a very powerful lobby, no? Very powerful lobby. And they are very exercised by the way the Chinese are treating the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, you know. So that's one issue that unites all Americans against China. The Chinese try to suppress the Christian church and Christian evangelicals in China. And that's another big issue in America. You know, Americans really believe in freedom of religion. They support the spread of Christianity. Then finally, I think the Chinese made a mistake. For the longest time, the American business community in China was a supporter of China, yeah? And they helped to bring stability to US policy toward China when parties changed. But the Chinese government alienated the American community in China, business community in China, by not treating them well, by forcing them to share their intellectual property rights, by not treating them as well as they treat their own company. So over time, China lost all the constituencies in America that used to support them. They've all turned against China. So today, I'm sorry to say that China had no supporter in America except maybe Henry Kissinger. Yeah. And the combination of Americans seeing the rise of China as a threat to American leadership and prosperity, combined with these constituencies who all have a grudge against America, result in a situation today which, if you look at the public opinion polls, I think something like 80% of the American people have a negative view of China. And this cuts across all demographies, you know. So this is the sorry state we're in. If you look at the public opinion poll in China, it mirrors the public opinion poll in America. The Chinese, of course, we used to admire America very much, you know. Now the Chinese have turned negative about America.
I'm not a Chinese speaker myself, but it just sticks in my mind that the word that the Chinese use for America is Meiguo, right? Beautiful country. So I think that's expressive of something.
Yeah.
So is your question answered? Do you have any follow-up? Or you would like to
Yes.
add in? Okay.
To answer your question, I think on national security, if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, the two parties tend to unite. If they sense a big national security threat or challenge to the US, the perception now seems to be in the intelligence and military and other agencies who make assessments of other countries, that the way China is becoming stronger economically and also the way it's building up its military and its various other influence operations, that it probably wants to oust America from Asia, East Asia. And that to the Americans, whether right or wrong, there is that perception, especially in the security agencies, which I think has become accepted in both parties in Congress. Then they will unite, as they have done before.
So since we had touched the topic of security, Mr. Singh, and that's a chapter that you wrote in the book as well about US military presence, how it came to be so widespread in Asia and other parts of the world as well. So we are talking today as the Shangri-La dialogue opens in just a few hours this evening, the keynote by the Japanese Prime Minister who's flying into Singapore. Now, you've described how Americans came to be here. Now, in the meantime, you know, we've spoken of the growing rivalry between US and China too. And the upshot at this point is that there is increased military presence by Americans and Chinese both. So how do you view this, this development? Is it worrisome or are you glad in some way?
No, this is, of course, a very worrisome development. And it seems to be getting worse. You know, I mean, the Ukraine war has made it worse because as far as America and the West is concerned, well, China has supported Russia. So we are seeing the emergence of a Sino-Russian bloc against the West. You know, so there has become even a greater threat. So at the moment things look pessimistic, unless I saw an article somewhere by that historian Neil Ferguson, is it? Yeah. I mean, he says it's time for the Biden administration to seek a period of détente with China. The way in the 1970s, when President Brezhnev was in power in the Soviet Union, the American leadership at that time thought that high tensions were not worth it. We can conduct our competition or rivalry with somewhat reduced tensions, and they embarked on a policy of détente. I don't know whether that will be possible in the present circumstances.
So the reason I should explain, the reason I said whether there's some reassurance in it is because when things are tense and when there is some kind of balance between competing powers, people find that, as a reason for, additional feeling safe or good they're here, or they're here for good reason. So there is that point of view. Anyway, we have the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin making a speech tomorrow. So, if you were in conversation with him, what would you advise him to say? What things would you like to hear?
Defense Minister on Sunday.
On Sunday, exactly so.
Both of them.
Yes.
The good news, they're meeting.
Oh, yes. So,
So-
can you tell us, do you know if when are they meeting?
I don't know, but let me just extend what Daljit said and say that the struggle between the US and China for supremacy will go on for a long time. Yeah, it will take years, perhaps decades, and it could either end in a war, which we all don't want, or it could end in a negotiated agreement between the two great powers, which is good for the world, but a bit dangerous for our small country, because we don't want the world to be governed by a condominium by these two countries. The current state of affairs between the US and China is very bad, very bad. There's a complete absence of trust between them. And because they don't trust each other, they don't talk to each other, they suspect each other of ill will, and there's almost on a daily basis you find statements coming out of Washington and Beijing which are insulting to the other, So yesterday I participated in a closed-door meeting on US-China relations. And my point to my Chinese and American friends is that it's time for you to rebuild trust. And the first step is to meet and talk. Because one of the bad things that President Trump did is what he did away with all the channels of communication between Beijing and Washington. Yeah. So President Biden should either restore them or create new channels of communication between the two countries. They need to talk. They need to consider whether there are areas in which the two countries have common interests and begin to learn to cooperate with each other. And it's not just climate change. Climate change is the only area now that Washington and Beijing work together, And at the COP26 in Glasgow, it was very inspiring that the US and China was able to issue a joint statement. Yeah. But they are not cooperating with each other in any other area, and they should, because peace on the Korean Peninsula is very important, and that cannot be achieved in the absence of US-China cooperation. Helping the WHO to be stronger, to be able to identify and fight against the next pandemic is very important. Currently, there's a food security crisis in the world, which need to be addressed. And if the two biggest economies in the world can't work together, it will make finding a solution difficult. So there are so many areas which require cooperation between the US and China. And at the moment, because they're not talking to each other, no such cooperation is taking place. So I'm very pleased that at least in Singapore, over the next couple of days, the Defense Minister of USA, Lloyd Austin, and the Defense Minister of China will be meeting each other. This will, I hope, begin a series of talks between leaders of the two countries.
Please, there's a question here.
First of all, I want to recommend the best article I've read on American politics. It's called De Tocqueville Revisited, American Politics Viewed from a Foreign Perspective. I graduated law school in America, and this is the best article on the American political system in English in the entire world. My question for you has to do with the idea of China and America not necessarily disengaging from the world economy, but pursuing it in different ways. We all know about China's Belt and Silk Road. We all know that China is moving away from sea-based trade and moving into land-based trade in order to avoid a confrontation with the United States Navy, which has, since World War II, just completely taken over sea-based trade. What do you think of this idea, not necessarily of a checkpoint Charlie, but of two separate economies growing in different ways over the next 25 years?
Well, thank you for your very kind remarks about a lecture I delivered at Harvard many years ago. Harvard was celebrating their, can't remember, 300th anniversary, and the Kennedy School had a one-day conference on the American democracy revisited. So they invited several of us foreigners who were friends of America to come and speak about our perspectives. I, of course, began by praising American democracy, but I also talked about some challenges. And one of the challenges I spoke about was the power of the lobby, And that speech almost lost me my job, One of the lobbies I criticized is the tuna lobby. See, once upon a time, America had a big fishing fleet, and these fishermen used to go to the economic zones of other countries, and without paying a fee or asking for permission, they would catch the tuna in these economic zones. And this caused a lot of problem between the United States and the Latin American coastal states. And because of the power of the tuna lobby, the State Department was not prepared to take a stand and tell that tuna fishermen, what you're doing is illegal, Anyway, the tuna lobby heard my lecture, and as you can imagine, they were very upset, and they wrote a letter to our then Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and told him to sack me. and Mr. Lee, out of curiosity, asked, could I send him a copy of my lecture, which I did. And after reading it, he said to me, I agree with your lectures. So, I don't think it's true that China is focusing on land-based trade and not sea-based trade. I think China is doing both. The Belt and Road Initiative has both an inland as well as a maritime bridge, So, and the Chinese Navy, as Daljit will tell you, is the Chinese Navy is coming up,
Yes.
It's become a blue water fleet. It has a global reach. It has a naval base in the Horn of Africa.
A third aircraft carrier, soon a third aircraft carrier.
Yeah, so the Chinese are becoming a global power, and they are developing their military capacities both on land, in the air, at sea, and in cyberspace. So if nothing catastrophic happens to China, China will become a superpower and a peer competitor of the United States. And if people in Washington want to stop the rise of China, I would say it's too late. It's now unstoppable. And that you got to learn to live at peace with this country, unless you want to go to war with China. I think you have a question.
Did you want to say something? Did you add to that?
I can. To answer your question, I don't think there can be, I think Tommy has already suggested that, I don't think there can be a complete decoupling. It's not possible. There will be to some extent, and that will be disruptive, not only to the United States and China, but to other countries. So we are going to face a period, this is another negative facing the world. These attempts by the US because they had enmeshed themselves with China in so many ways. Now they feel that China is a threat, so they want to cut off some of those connections. So it will be disruptive. It will add to. Now, I want to answer your other question, and that is what would I say to the U.S. Defense Secretary? Now, you pardon me if I disagree with you a little bit.
No, disagreement is good.
Yes, I would tell him that what you are doing is, at the moment, is very good. You need to build the structures to have a proper balance of power. I'm a balance of power man. I feel that if you have a balance of power between China and the US in Asia, then the smaller countries have more space for maneuver, more freedom. Now, China's power has been growing so fast, I think you need to build structures of balance, which the US is doing now with AUKUS, Quad, and all these things. But at a certain point, you have to start talking. It's like Reagan, the first term, he was so hawkish on the Soviet Union, and people were very worried that there could be a nuclear war. But after the first term, I think he tried to reach out.
Yes. So since I'm from Europe, my interest would be, where do you think are the biggest differences between, let's say, sorry?
Can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Where do you think are the biggest differences between the Singaporean view on America, for example, when you compare it to the European view?
You have to ask a European to answer that.
Yeah, I'm, for example, from Europe. But
Are you from
curious.
Europe?
Yes, I'm from Europe. So where do you think...
You should read our book first, then you tell me. I'm sure there's a difference.
There's a copy there.
True.
I'm sure there's a difference because there's a very long historical link between the United States and Europe, and it's a relationship based not just on history but on common values. So it's a very deep relationship. But the Europeans are not American. They have a different view of the world. Today is my Germany day, so I had a visitor from Germany this morning, and I took another German to lunch today, and they were explaining to me how, although they're critical of China, but they don't share some of President Biden's views and actions. They're not comfortable with the fact that President Biden building all these anti-China coalitions, Quad and then AUKUS. They would like America to be strong, but at the same time to engage China in dialogue and cooperation. Yeah. So I would say the European view is probably closer to ours, but different.
Yes, please go ahead.
So your German day continues. You talked about the disunited nations and
No, disunited states.
disunited states of America, and that is a high polarization. And you talked about that the domestic policy is the most important part for the US to stay at the point where they are right now. Could you imagine that, like, for example, there was a movement in Spain where Catalan wanted to become independent of Spain, that some states of the United States want to become independent of the other states of the country, and that this would lead to more disruption in the country and to the fall and the start of the end.
This produced the Civil War, as you know, when a group of southern states formed a confederation and they wanted to secede from the United States. And you had a Civil War, which was a very bloody war, and the North won. It's different. What's going on in Europe is different. You have groups of people that belong to a larger country, whether it's the Scots in the United Kingdom or the Catalonians in Spain, and perhaps there are other communities who feel that they feel very strongly about their identity. Many people in Scotland feel that it was a mistake for them to join England in the United Kingdom 300 years ago, and that they've been treated as second-class citizens by the English, and that they are economically viable, and that they would be better off if they were to leave the United Kingdom and become a sovereign and independent state. Boris Johnson wouldn't let them have a second referendum. But sooner or later, a second referendum will be held in Scotland. And I would not be surprised if, after 300 years in the United Kingdom, our Scottish friend decided to leave and become a sovereign, independent country. I don't think London will take up arms to prevent this from happening. In the case of Spain, I'm not very knowledgeable about Spain, but I must tell you that when I was running the Asia-Europe Foundation, I did a lecture tour of Spain. I was quite taken aback. When I went to Barcelona, I flew from Madrid to Barcelona. And when I arrived in Barcelona, I felt that I was in a different country, because in the parliament in Barcelona, they were not speaking Spanish, but their own Catalonian language, And they felt that that their union with Spain has been disadvantageous to them. They have their own identity, their own language, their own culture. And Catalonia is the most prosperous part of Spain. So they're economically viable, like Scotland, And they demand a referendum to decide their future. I think Madrid is against and will not let them have it. But at some point, Madrid has to allow the Catalonians a right to determine their destiny. And if they wish to secede in Spain, I don't think Madrid will take up arms to suppress them, But it will not break up those countries. I think United Kingdom will go on, unless the Welsh also succeed. Then instead of Great Britain, you have small Britain. And in the case of Spain, I think even without Catalonia, it's still a viable state. So this is one of the tendencies in the world that is worrisome to people in Asia, particularly to the Chinese. The Chinese are always so worried about what they call separatist elements in Tibet and Xinjiang. That's why they control those two territories so tightly, because they will not allow either Tibet or Xinjiang to secede from China.
Okay. So while we're still in Europe, want to ask you, of course, this book was written before the Ukraine war. It was published late last year, December 2021. Right. So since then, of course, we have this huge geopolitical shock in the form of the war. And there is this perspective that this is a war in which you have Russia on one side and you have, it's like a proxy war. So although it's on Ukraine, it's US-led NATO, which is arming, supporting Ukraine. Therefore, it is a war between the two sides in that sense. Now, in this war, as it goes on, what are your observations on this face of America we are seeing now through the prism of this war? Are you appreciative of what's gone on so far by the US, their policies and so on?
I'm not happy with the way you frame it. Yeah, I think so I want to appeal to all of you for support. Please don't regard the war in Ukraine as a proxy war. It is not a proxy war between Russia and the West. It is not what Biden has said. Biden has said it's a war between autocracy and democracy. It's wrong. All these attempts to frame it is wrong. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of the right of countries to their territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. 3 sacred principles enshrined in the UN Charter. And I want to tell you a story. I was at the UN in 1978, 1979, and 1983. What is the significance of these 3 dates? In 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia. 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. In 1983, the United States invaded a small Caribbean country, Grenada. And I'm proud to tell you that on all 3 occasions, Singapore authorized me to speak at the UN and condemn those 3 countries. When we condemned the United States, I think many people were shocked because they thought that given our close relationship with the Americans, we would not have the courage and not be willing to bear whatever political cost would entail to stand up and say to the Americans, you have violated the sovereignty, independence, and territorial of Grenada. What you have done is wrong and unacceptable. This is our position, you know. For the same reason, we have condemned the Soviet Union, the Russians, for invading Ukraine. It is not a proxy war, not a war between autocracy and democracy. The crux of the problem, and this is my view, I may be wrong, the crux of the problem is that President Putin had not come to terms with the loss of the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union was the Russian Empire. And when Russia lost its empire, many Russians are nostalgic for the good old days, so-called good old days, no? When they ruled so many countries and people. And President Putin still wants to have control and dominance over his neighbors. You see? That's why he say to Ukraine, you cannot join NATO. You know? But what gives Russia the right to say to their neighbors, what organization they can and cannot join? And I want to tell you another story. In 1993, 2 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the UN appointed me as the peacemaker to Russia, to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. At that time, there were Russian troops in those 3 countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. There were also Russian bases in Estonia and Latvia. And the 4 countries couldn't agree on a timetable for the withdrawal of troops, closure of the bases. So I was asked to go and make peace between them, you know, which I succeeded because the timing was good. 93 was a good year to make peace. When I was in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, I told the leaders of those 3 countries, you should join the European Union for your economic well-being, and you should join NATO for your security. Was I wrong to give them that advice? Should I have consulted in Moscow first? No way, you know. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are independent countries. They have a right to decide on their destinies. And if they want to join the EU and NATO, Russia cannot veto that and say, we agree, disagree, you can't do it. Why? Russia has no sway over them. So in my view, Russia had no right to tell its neighbors, such as Ukraine or Georgia, whether they can or cannot join the European Union and NATO. It's their sovereign right as an independent state to do so. Yeah. So this is why Singapore has been so outspoken, because we are a small country, you know, and we know that what happened in Ukraine can happen to us. You know.
Sure. There's a question here. But meanwhile, very quickly, Professor Koh, you haven't fully answered my question. So in this war, what's your assessment of American leadership?
Yes, the Americans have been united in this war because European security and NATO is very important to the US. If they had allowed Russia to succeed in this, you know, the whole Western alliance would have been endangered, because then Russia might try to take back other units of its former empire, you know, especially the Baltic states, whole of Georgia and all that. So I think the country, the United States, the country as a whole, and very important is the political leadership, especially in Congress. They saw this threat and they responded with unity.
When the Russians put missile silos in Cuba, the United States under JFK obviously had a reaction. And the idea, and even today, has sanctioned Cuba for essentially the same thing that the United States is doing against Russia, which is placing missiles nearby its border. Is there an element of hypocrisy involved in the foreign policy of the United States? And if so, how does not just Singapore, but how does the world maintain its credibility vis-a-vis the United Nations when one superpower is attempting to create an inconsistent foreign policy?
Hypocrisy is a necessary element of foreign policy. No country's foreign policy can be, and I'm serious, no country's foreign policy can be perfectly consistent, you know? So people point out to me, yes, you condemn Vietnam, Soviet Union, America, but you didn't condemn the American invasion of Iraq, which is true. We forgot to condemn the Russian invasion of Georgia, 2008, although I pushed for it, but my bosses didn't agree, you see. So I would say inconsistency rather than hypocrisy. In the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the negotiation between the US and Soviet Union resulted in this. There was a quid pro quo, no? The Soviet Union agreed to withdraw the missiles from Cuba. In return, the Americans agreed to withdraw the missile from Turkey. I don't know whether you know that. There was a quid pro quo. Yeah. And yes. You know that, right? So there was a quid pro quo. And it's so important for them to talk, you know. I mean, we don't want another nuclear crisis between the Chinese and the Americans, you know. So it's important that they talk to each other. If you intend to emplace your missiles in a country close to me, you better let me know in advance. You know. I will either try to dissuade you, or I might tell you if you do that, then I will put my missiles in a country close to you, you know. So therefore, the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore this weekend is very important to world peace. That for the first time, the defense ministers of China and the United States are sitting down at a table and talking to each other. And we need Biden and Xi Jinping to do that too, not just virtually, you know, but to actually have face-to-face meeting. And we need the foreign secretary to meet each other, the National Security Council advisor to meet each other, and to actually talk to each other, not to talk past each other. Up to now, when they meet, they are talking past each other, you know. I'm telling you all the bad things you do, and I'm telling you how good I am. They are not listening to each other. They are not telling you what my national interests are, what my core interests are, where my red lines are, and try to persuade you to respect my core interests, and for you to then tell me, okay, you have a red line, but I have a red line too, you know. So we need dialogue to begin again between Washington and Beijing. And we are very fortunate in Singapore to host the first face-to-face meeting between the defense minister of USA and China this coming weekend.
Any more questions?
Yeah. My name is Daisy Chua. I'm a Singaporean. My two questions are addressed to Professor Koh, which I understand that you still go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs every day as an ambassador at large. So first, I must admit that I have not read your book yet. And also, secondly, my reading has not taken me wide enough to know whether the answer to my impending question is already out. My question is this: what were the factors that our government consider when they abstain from excluding the Russian from the human rights of the United Nations, when they condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine? So it's very conflicting. So
no, it's
I'm
not actually. Okay, let me explain. Huh?
Yeah.
When the UN General Assembly had a resolution, which we co-sponsored, condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we, together with 140 plus countries, voted for. Subsequently, there was another resolution in the General Assembly to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council. And we abstained, and this caused consternation. People couldn't understand. How could you vote, against the Russians in the earlier resolution, and now you abstain? We abstained for technical reasons.
Are you at liberty to review the reasons?
No, because the Human Rights Council has set up a committee to review US membership of the Council. And maybe the trouble with Singaporeans is that we tend to be stickler for rules, right? So our view is that since we've set up a committee to review US membership of the Human Rights Council, why don't we wait for the committee to finish its work and report back to us before we take action against the Russians? Yeah. So we abstained for purely technical reasons. We have not changed our position. We still feel very strongly that what the Russians have done to the Ukrainians is absolutely wrong. And the way the war is being fought is totally merciless, I mean, you look at Ukraine, it's destroyed, all the infrastructure, all the more non-military infrastructure has been destroyed, And it's a miracle that the Ukrainian people refuse to surrender, In spite of the odds against them, the Ukrainians remain united and determined to resist. It's very impressive.
My second question, Professor Koh, I feel that the international community, which includes Singapore and America, are not doing enough to at least stop the war, because America has the intelligence to know that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Yeah, but maybe for sovereignty.
But Biden did say before the invasion that the 100,000 troops and heavy armor along the border is a prelude to invasion. He did say that.
He did say, that means they knew, but nothing is being done by America or the international community to help to prevent this war.
No, but you see, neither America nor Europe won a war between Russia and NATO or Russia and the United States. Such a war would be the Third World War. It will be a nuclear war. And as you know, a nuclear war results in a mutual destruction. There's a word for it called, MAD, right? Mutual assured destruction. That is something we want to avoid. So Russia, the Americans have been very careful. No Russian soldiers in Ukraine, and no American soldier will ever be sent to Ukraine. Unless, of course, the Russians use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. If they do that, then all bets are off, And NATO doesn't want a war with Russia. So they supply arms, they give Ukraine money, but no military person from NATO or from the United States is in Ukraine. Yeah. So it's a fine line,
So, Professor Koh, we are 100 days or more than 100 days into the Ukrainian war. I'd like to hear your take on what should be done, the international community, which includes Singapore, or how to stop this war, because it's affecting everybody, food supply chain, all kinds of things.
But nobody can stop the war except President Putin. And stopping the war is not his agenda. I mean, he wants victory, I think his own survival is now at stake. Yeah. I think he can't afford to lose this war. So the question is, at what point will the two countries go back to the negotiating table? And what kind of a settlement will they negotiate, At the moment, I don't see a compromise, because Putin cannot afford to end the war empty-handed. He must retain Crimea. He would like to get the two provinces in Donbass, Luhansk and Donbass. I think no Ukrainian government in Kiev would survive if they were to give away these three territories, So I just don't see the compromise between what the Ukrainians can accept and what the Russians want, So at the moment, I just don't see compromise. The Turks are trying to persuade the two sides to go back to the negotiating table. I don't see a deal, What's the deal? Do you see a deal?
No.
Don't see a deal, right? So it's very sad for the Ukrainian people. The country is being destroyed. The 6 million people have gone abroad as refugees, you know. What can we do? We can give them a moral support. We can contribute money to them. I just sent another $1,000 to the Red Cross Society yesterday to help the Ukrainians. We don't have weapons to give them. Other countries do and have given them weapons to level the playing field so that the Ukrainians are in a better position to fight against the Russians. That's all you can do.
May I add something?
Yeah, please.
I think perhaps, I mean, this, I may be wrong on this. The West, the Americans in particular, and the Europeans, they can calibrate a sort of stalemate which will ultimately lead to some kind of settlement by controlling the sorts of weapons they send to Ukraine. Because if you start sending very long-range weapons to hit Russia, they'll only make things worse. So I notice now the Russians are using long-range weapons. So the Ukrainians have been requesting long-range artillery, long-range rockets, but the Americans have restricted that to 60 miles. I think the Europeans may want to, France and Germany may want even less. So if you can reach a situation by calibrating this where Russia cannot win and Ukraine cannot lose completely, maybe it's just a guess. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, your earlier question, why did the West not intervene earlier when it was being said Russia is going to invade Ukraine? I think Professor Koh has answered that, but if I can clarify a little bit. Because at that time, the assumption was that Russia will win very quickly, you know, and Ukraine will crumble. So it will be within a week, Ukraine will crumble. So if you intervene, you will be fighting Russians, which the Americans and the British will be fighting the Russians, which will be Third World War. But once the Ukrainians showed that they could resist strongly, then they could give them arms to keep up the fight without sending their own men in.
Daljit is right, and you may remember that I think the Americans had no confidence that the Ukrainians could resist the Russians. And early in the war, you may remember the Americans offered to evacuate President Zelensky from Kyiv, you know. And his reply was wonderful, saying that I don't need a right, I need ammunition. So I think the Russians underestimated the Ukrainians. Even the Americans underestimated them, thought that the war will be over soon, you know. But nobody could have estimated that the Ukrainian people would be so united and so brave, you know, and that they're willing to fight and lose their lives. So this is a lesson for big countries. Before you invade a small country, beware. The small country may not be as easy as you think they will be because they will put on a fight. So shall we end this or?
I think there was a question here.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a quick question. So you mentioned the ongoing cultural war in America, right, on the deeply polarizing issues like LGBT issues, abortion, etc. How susceptible do you think Singapore is to this cultural war? How could it come here, and how can we prevent this?
Will the American culture war come to Singapore?
Yeah, sorry.
Easier. Yeah, please.
So you mentioned about the deeply polarizing cultural war in America, right? And we see these effects of polarization in Europe, like in Brexit, and with the immigration problems there. Then do you think, how susceptible do you think Singapore is to this cultural war? How could it come here, and how can we actually prevent this?
So the bottom line is that we are not immune. We're not immune that policies which we think are settled may not be so settled in the future. For example, our abortion law. I think there are many Christians and Catholics who are opposed to our law, you know. And we don't know whether they will agitate for a change. Many Christian churches here in Singapore are influenced by the Christian evangelicals in America. And I hope that the Christian evangelical don't export their agenda to Singapore. Because if that happens, there's a danger that Singapore will become divided and polarized, on all these issues. The Singapore government has been moving rather slowly. For example, on gay marriages, I don't think the Singapore government will, at least not in the near future, recognize gay marriages, because they know that it's very polarizing, So LGBT, I think we've come to a sort of a compromise that we accept that it's part of the human condition that some people are born gay, lesbian, transgender, and so on, that we will not persecute them. We accept them as part of the family, but we will not allow them to campaign for their lifestyle as an equally legitimate lifestyle. So that's a compromise. The compromise may not last. I think things could change. So we're not immune. A cultural war in America may come here. Yeah. So since you're the next generation, please prevent it from coming.
I think there's a question there he's been waiting to ask. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so good afternoon, professors. So today I got a question about our country's defense, especially relying on other countries. Okay, I am going to be serving NS in the next 4 years, and I'll be eligible to be called up for the next 22 years after that.
How old are you now?
I'm 15.
15, okay.
Okay,
so 3 more years.
So I'll be actively involved in the defense of Singapore until I'm 40. Yeah. Okay, so the question now is, how are we going to, with US turning inwards and with all their splits and all the weird conflicts going on right now within their own country, who do we look to for our own defense? Because we can't possibly be looking at ourselves. We are a very small population. I believe our army is only like less than 2 million, and I don't think we can withstand a sizable invasion from any other country within the region. And so thus we need to look for another source of defense, or at least act as always have a sizable deterrence to deter away any invaders. But if, touch wood, really something bad happens, who should we look to for defense in this increasingly split world?
I'm afraid in the event of a crisis, nobody will come to our rescue. I mean, maybe Daljit is more optimistic. I'm a pessimistic optimist. I think we have to look to ourselves. That's why we have national service. That's why we have an SAF. We spend a very high percentage of GDP on defense, and we Singaporeans must be modest. Don't boast about it. But you may not know that we have the best air force in Southeast Asia. Yeah. We have a very high-tech army. SAF is a serious deterrent to aggression. But we want to create a peaceful environment. Do you know that we are the largest investor both in Malaysia and Indonesia? Our policy is that we want our neighbors to succeed and to prosper. Because a prosperous Malaysia, a prosperous Indonesia is good for Singapore. We are the biggest investor, not just in those two countries, but also in China. We are the second biggest, I think, Asian investor in Japan. We are the biggest investor in India. So we are giving all these countries a stake in Singapore's survival and independence. And we are very active in our diplomacy. Why do we create platforms like the Shangri-La Dialogue? Because we want all the defense ministers, intelligence chiefs of Asia-Pacific region to meet here annually, to talk to each other, to understand that Singapore as an independent country is of value to them. But in the event of a crisis, would anybody rescue us? I don't think so. I've asked Daljit whether if we face the same dilemma as Qatar did a few years ago, remember? 4 neighbors of Qatar imposed a blockade on Qatar. It was terrifying for the Qataris, no? And what saved them were Turkey and Iran, you know. So Qatar was saved by 2 foreign powers. Would any foreign power save us? I'm sorry to say that I don't think so. I don't think so. So we depend on you, no? I hope you will do well in the national service and be proud to serve until you're 40 years old. And in the event of a crisis, that you will respond and fight for Singapore.
Do you have a contrasting view?
Well, I think Professor Koh has put it well. As far as our own military is concerned, we should have a first-class military which has got a technological edge over neighboring militaries. But we must not forget that in the event a country attacks us, a bigger country, we can only raise their costs for attacking us. If a much bigger country, in the end, may well prevail. So diplomacy is very important. We give other countries, especially our neighbors, a stake in our well-being. And we strive to have good relations with the biggest powers in the world, so that if their interests align with us, they may be able to help us politically. But we can't bank on that. Yeah.
Right. So we're approaching the end of this session, but we have a couple more questions. We can definitely take them. Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So perhaps if you can raise.
So I got a question. If touchwood Singapore is invaded by big countries in future, will Singapore seek allies like US first for assistance or defend the invaders by herself?
Sorry, could you repeat that? We didn't quite get that.
If Singapore is invaded, will we ask America?
If touchwood Singapore is invaded by big countries in future, will Singapore seek allies like US first for assistance or defend the invaders by herself?
Okay, and I think there's some more. Any other question? I think there's one here. Sure.
Neither Republicans or the Democrats have any younger leaders or conciliatory leaders emerging, especially the Republican Party, and with a cultural war, with guns, Black Lives Matter, that sort of thing, right? Where do you see America going? Can you give us a crystal ball into midterm elections?
And any other question? Then we can just take them together. I think there's one here.
Hi. May I know what's your general impression of publications like The Economist and FT with regards to their reporting on what's happening in America?
On what?
The reporting by the Economist or Financial Times in terms of their reporting on what's happening in America, the quality of their reporting.
Okay. You mean you're asking me to tell you what's the quality of Bhagyashree? No, she's very good. No, but it's a serious question. I think that maybe if I can reformulate your question, in order to be well informed by the world, about the world, what should an intelligent Singaporean like you look to for accurate sources of information? I think that's a question, yeah. So I'll ask Daljit to answer that. I think the question about who will rescue us, I've already answered, right? I've already answered that. Unfortunately, I've come to the pessimistic conclusion that in the event of a crisis like what Qatar experienced, there's no other country that will rescue us. We have to depend on ourselves. So the challenge to our diplomats is to prevent prevent a scenario in which any of our neighbors will want to do us harm. That's my work and my colleagues' work. That diplomacy must work, you see. In the case of Qatar, diplomacy failed. And 4 of the neighbors feel so angry with them that they wanted to impose a total blockade on them, you know. So I would say that it is a job of diplomats to make sure that we enjoy good relations, not just with our neighbor, but as Daljit say, with the great powers, you know, and create a scenario in which they all have a stake in Singapore, they all wish us well, and nobody wish us harm. See? But if a crisis comes, and crisis could come, then we have to look to ourselves, you know. We, of course, will go to the UN and ask for help. We'll go to the International Court of Justice for ask for help. But whether we get help or not depends on whether the 5 great powers will help us. Because if one of them vetoes a resolution, then it will fail, you know. So this is the real world we live in, no? So at the end of the day, you have to look to yourself for your independence and survival. I ask you to read today's Straits Times in section C, the live section. There's an interview with a Singaporean actor called Ik Shen, who is married to a Ukrainian wife. And he spent maybe ever since 24 February, they were living in Kyiv. They then relocated to Poland, and now he's back in Ukraine, helping to find medical supplies to bring to the hospital and medical institutions in Ukraine. A noble job, you know. So the Straits Times, Bhagyashree colleagues asked him, so what's the biggest lesson you learned? And listen to this. Ik Shen say, Singaporeans should not take our independence for granted. You know.
So that's sorry.
So Daljit, you want to answer?
Oh, do you have any your crystal ball? What does it say?
Midterm election, U.S. midterm election.
Because
midterm election. I mean, this is nobody can tell. Sorry, but the Democrats may well lose their majorities in both houses. I think, you know, it's strange that the American public reacts rather negatively to the left wing. To progressive proposals. They always feel that going too far on spending too much money on welfare and all that is bad, and they react against it. I think Biden has had this negative reaction, which accounts for the fall of his popularity ratings. You know?
But he's unpopular because the Republicans don't accept him as a legitimate president. Because of Donald Trump, who said he actually won the election and Biden stole it from him.
Those people are only about 35% of the population, you see.
No.
70% of the Republican members. So
well, actually nobody knows, right? Politics very unpredictable, but the historical trend is not in Biden's favor. The historical trend is that in a midterm election, the incumbent president will lose seats both in the House and Senate. And if this historical trend comes true in November this year, it's very bad for Biden because he will then lose control of both the Senate and the House. And the Republicans will make his life very difficult, you know. So, but what to do? This is what I describe as American democracy in trouble, that the two parties refuse to cooperate with each other. They see each other as enemies. We must wish America well, but it has so many problems, you know. And it's a shame that America, the high priest of free trade, has now declared that they no longer believe in free trade. You know, Donald Trump has made protectionism respectable in America. I mean, to me, this is unimaginable, no? Because historically, the Republican Party has always stood for free trade. But Donald Trump came along and said, no, that was a mistake. Free trade is bad for America and we should pursue protectionism. He forgot the history of the 1930s, when America went protectionist, enacted the notorious Smoot-Hawley law. And what happened? It produced a Great Depression, you know. But Americans, like Singaporeans, have short memory. They don't remember the past. They refuse to draw the right lessons from history. And it looks like history has to repeat itself, yeah. So, I think I'm too pessimistic. I must end on an optimistic note. So the bottom line is this. Flawed as American democracy is, on balance, America is still a force of good in the world. Not just the government, but the NGOs, the foundations, the charities, the universities. Over the last 50 years, Americans have educated so many millions of Asian men and women at the top universities. You know? And there's a tremendous capacity for innovation and creativity in America. There's no place on earth that resembles the Silicon Valley, you know. And their culture is the opposite of Singapore culture. If you fail, there's no stigma to failure. We expect you to pick yourself up and try again. You know, we celebrate people like a British guy, you know, James Dyson, who said he was trying to invent a different kind of vacuum cleaner. And his first 3,256 prototype all failed. But he never gave up. And his next prototype, 5,127 succeeded. So we need people like that in Singapore, you know, who will defy the odds, will see failure as one of my favorite quotes is a quote from the first president of the Republic of China, Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen said, to him, failure is the mother of success. So we need that to be the Singapore mindset and culture, you know. So these are many aspects of America that I admire. They are good people. They want to do good for the world. It's a country in great difficulties. We must hope that they will recover, make peace internally, and continue to be a force of good for the world. Yeah.
So thank you for that. I think that very neatly brings us back to where we started from. And this, absolutely. So you hear it from Professor Koh himself. The books indeed are on sale, and we are pleased to announce that the special book fair price is $25. The usual price is $32.10. So if you buy today, yes, you get a good discount right there.
And Daljit and I will sign the book.
Yes, and the authors are here to also oblige you with their autographs. Now, this was a beautiful afternoon, and it was fantastic. It was very lucid, and I loved hearing you. I profited immensely, I think, from this conversation. Thank you very much to both of you. It was amazing and valuable. Thank you. And thank you. Okay, sure. And thank you to our audience. And we hope to see you again, another discussion like this. Thank you.